We don't always notice the exact second a life splits in two. Sometimes it's quieter than that. A small sound, a shift in a room, the kind of thing that wouldn't matter unless it happens to you. Noelle Carter didn't lose her voice that day. She lost the last reason she kept paying for people who never showed up for her in the ways that counted. This is the moment she starts from. I was already at the microphone when I heard Sloan. Not loud, not meant for me. Just a thin little whisper from the front row that still landed like it had been fed through the speakers. Isn't this over yet? I'm going to be late for brunch. My eyes stayed on the page in front of me, but my focus went soft at the edges. I knew that voice the way you know the sound of a door closing in your own house. Sloan leaned toward Ethan like she belonged there, like she'd always belonged there. He didn't move away. He didn't even look uncomfortable. He just sat with his knee angled toward her, watch face turned up, waiting. Elaine tried to do something that looked like parenting. Sloan, please. Noelle's speaking. Sloan didn't bother lowering her voice much. So what? The catering window starts soon, if we're not there. The champagne's going to get warm. Ethan's mouth did this half smile that wasn't even a real smile, more like he was trying to disappear without leaving his seat. You said the suite was ready, he murmured, like this was a scheduling issue. Sloane's nails tapped lightly against his wrist. It is. I booked it. I'm not wasting it. David didn't shush anyone. He didn't glance up at me. He kept his hands folded over his program like the whole thing was a formality he'd agreed to attend. Not a moment that mattered. I kept reading my speech. I kept my voice steady. I kept the same pace I'd practiced in my apartment at 1 a.m. when I was too tired to sleep. I was the valedictorian. I'd spent the last 18 months doing my MBA while working full-time at a consulting firm. Not because I needed the money, because I needed the room. It gave me the doors it opened, the names you meet, the way you learn how large organizations actually move when no one is watching. On stage. I didn't look at them. I refused to give them that. Then I saw motion anyway. Sloan stood first, not hurried, not embarrassed. She smoothed her dress like she was leaving a charity luncheon. She leaned down toward Ethan. Come on. Ethan hesitated for a beat, just long enough to make it clear he understood what he was doing. Then he rose and followed her. Elaine looked toward David, like she was waiting for him to correct it. Like she was waiting for him to be the kind of father who didn't let his daughter get abandoned in public. David exhaled through his nose, stood, and adjusted his jacket. Elaine stood last, not because she stayed for me, because she needed that extra second to tell herself she'd tried. They moved down the row. 4 bodies, 1 decision. We watched the heads turn before Noelle did the way an entire auditorium notices a family leaving. The way the air shifts when something private becomes visible. I kept speaking. My throat didn't close. My hands didn't shake. I didn't stop. The red doors at the back of the hall swallowed them one by one. When the last door swung shut, something in me went quiet in a way I can't explain without sounding dramatic. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. After the applause, after the photos and the hugs and the polite noise, I checked my phone. No texts, no missed calls, nothing. I stared at the blank screen and felt almost calm. Not because it didn't hurt, because I had been preparing for that exit long before they ever stood up. And if this lands with you in a quiet way, you can leave a thought where people usually do. I read them later when the room is finally still. The clapping started before I finished the last sentence. It rolled in fast, loud enough to feel physical, like pressure against my ribs. I stepped back from the microphone, nodded once, and followed the stage manager's gesture toward the stairs. My heels caught slightly on the edge of the step. Someone reached out, steadying my elbow. "Careful," a woman from the faculty whispered, smiling too hard. I smiled back because that's what you do. Backstage smelled like coffee and warm electronics. People were already lining up, faces bright, voices raised. Noelle. That was incredible. You didn't rush a single word. I got chills when you talked about responsibility. Hands touched my shoulders, my arms. Quick, congratulatory squeezes. Phones appeared. Photo, I stepped into the circle. Someone counted down from 3. The flash went off. I kept my posture straight, chin level, like I hadn't just watched my family walk out on me in front of an entire graduating class. When it slowed, when people drifted back toward their own families, I slipped my phone out of my clutch. Nothing. No message from Ethan, no apology from Elaine, no explanation from David, no joke from Sloan pretending this was all normal. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, long enough for the noise to start sounding distant, like it belonged to a different room. A classmate I barely knew touched my wrist. "Hey, are you coming to the reception in a minute?" I told her. She nodded, hesitated like she wanted to say something else, then let it go. I walked down the side hallway instead. The carpet was worn thin there. A maintenance cart sat against the wall, half open. Someone had left a bottle of water on top of it. I picked it up, twisted the cap, took a sip. My hand was steady. That surprised me. I leaned back against the wall, felt the cool through the fabric of my gown, and checked my phone again. Still nothing. Not even a missed call. The quiet didn't feel empty. It felt familiar. I stayed there until the applause in the main hall faded into general noise, until the moment passed from public to private. Only then did I push off the wall and walk back toward the lights, already knowing I wasn't going home with them. People like to believe marriages fall apart suddenly. One day, everything is fine. The next day, it's not. That wasn't how ours worked. The first time Ethan and I talked seriously about a prenuptial agreement, we were sitting at the small kitchen table in my old apartment. The place barely fit 2 chairs. My laptop was open, unread emails glowing on the screen. "I just want to be clear from the start," I told him. "Anything I build stays mine." "Same for you." He laughed, leaning back, chair creaking. "You sound like a lawyer. I work with them every day." "That's different," he said. "This is us." I slid the printed pages across the table anyway. The stack wasn't thick, but it was precise. Startup equity excluded. Separate property defined. No vague language. He flipped through it quickly, barely slowing down. "You really think this is necessary?" He looked up, half amused. "I'm not marrying you for money." "I know," I said. "That's why this shouldn't bother you." He shrugged, picked up the pen. "Fine, if it helps you sleep." The pen scratched across the paper, just like that. At the time, I told myself it was practicality. I'd already seen enough mergers fall apart to know clarity mattered. I was working long hours at the consulting firm then, learning how companies protected themselves from their own worst impulses. I wasn't making real money yet, not the kind that shows up on anyone's radar. Ethan liked to talk about how refreshing that was. "You don't act rich," he used to say, like it was a compliment. I didn't correct him. When I started the MBA, he was proud in a vague, surface way, told people I was ambitious, told them I'd always been like that. "You'll be running some massive company one day," he said once, smiling. "Just don't forget about me when you do." "I won't," I said, meaning something different than he heard. We signed the final version of the agreement a few weeks before the wedding. A notary met us at a coffee shop near the courthouse. Ethan joked with her while she stamped the pages, asked if she did weddings on the side. She smiled politely and handed the folder back to me. "Keep this somewhere safe." I did. At the time, it felt like insurance, something you hope you never need. Standing backstage after my graduation, phone still silent in my hand, I understood it had been something else entirely. It had been the first boundary I ever set with him, and the only one he'd never noticed. The invitation to move back into the family estate arrived wrapped in the thin, trembling paper of my mother's fragility. Elaine called while I was reviewing a merger model at the office. Her voice was a practiced whisper of exhaustion. "I didn't want to bother you, Noelle, but the house. It's too large now. My chest feels heavy in the silence. I think my heart is simply tired of being alone. It was classic Elaine weaponized vulnerability. I knew, rationally, that my father was in the next room and Sloane was likely in the kitchen, but Elaine's specialty was making her loneliness feel like your fault. When I mentioned it to Ethan, he leaned against our kitchen island, already looking too comfortable with the idea. She's spiraling. Noelle. If we move in, we save on rent while you finish the MBA, and I can keep an eye on her while you're at the firm. It's a strategic win for everyone. He called it a win. I saw it as an audit. A week later, at the mahogany dining table in Palo Alto, the trap was set. Elaine reached across the lace runner, her palm damp against mine. Just until the MBA is over, she pleaded. I need to know someone is here if I stop breathing in the middle of the night. David didn't look up from his Financial Times. Sloane was busy tagging herself at a beach club. They weren't a family. They were a collection of people waiting for someone else to pay the bill. We'll move in, I said, watching Ethan's eyes light up with a greed he thought he was hiding. But I need a hard boundary. My finances stay separate, and my schedule is mine. Of course. Darling. Elaine exhaled, the crisis vanishing instantly from her eyes. We moved in within the month. I didn't unpack my heavy suitcases. I lived out of a carry-on, a physical reminder that this was an assignment, not a return. I watched Ethan adjust with terrifying ease, handing over the logistics of our life to my mother. Don't worry about the household accounts, Ethan told me, his feet up on David's ottoman. I'll manage the transfers with your mother so you can focus on the firm. You're doing so much already. I let him. Not because I was tired, but because I needed to see exactly how they moved when they thought I wasn't looking. Proximity wasn't about fixing our relationship anymore. It was about gathering the data I needed to leave them forever. I wasn't moving home. I was entering the field for a final 2-year study on the people who claimed to love me. Sundays at the Palo Alto house weren't just gatherings. They were a well-oiled system of extraction. By 11, the scent of expensive lilies filled the foyer Sloane's signature. She would breeze in, sunglasses shielding eyes that were always scanning for the best light. Extra trays today. Ethan, she'd command, dropping her Chanel bag like a gavel. I invited the club board. It's for the family image. Elaine would beam, acting as the spiritual architect of these charades. It's so important to maintain our presence. Noelle, she'd say, touching my arm with that damp, fragile palm. Ethan, meanwhile, had carved out a permanent station at the kitchen island. His laptop was always open, his fingers dancing across the keys with a newfound unearned authority. I'll handle the reconciliation, he'd say casually. Go back to your case studies. Noelle, I've got the household logistics under control. The first invoice I bothered to check was buried under a pile of generic receipts. Ethan leaned over my shoulder, smelling of the expensive scotch I hadn't realized we were buying. Just the usual maintenance, he murmured, pointing to a line item labeled property upkeep, catering, staff, a few rentals for the patio. It's all categorized correctly for the shared account. The total was 5 figures. It was high excessive, even but intentionally vague. Property upkeep. I asked, my voice flat. The house is old. Noelle, things need fixing. Don't be so cynical. He kissed my temple, a gesture meant to silence, not soothe. As the weeks bled into months, the system matured. The Sunday brunches became galas. The property upkeep line items grew teeth, morphing into consultancy fees and miscellaneous services. Ethan began moving money between our accounts with a frantic efficiency, justifying it as liquidity management. He was no longer just a husband. He was an authorized user who had mistaken a credit limit for a personality. One afternoon, I paused on the mahogany staircase, hidden by the turn of the banister. Ethan was on the phone, his voice a low, oily purr. No, the transfer went through, he said. She doesn't look at the granular data. She's too buried in her MBA finals. She trusts me to keep the lights on. He laughed a sharp, jagged sound. Exactly. As long as the house looks full, she thinks the money is going to her mother's care. Just send the invoice for the Los Angeles trip to the house renovation folder. I didn't storm down the stairs. I didn't scream. I simply went back to my room, opened my laptop, and began a separate spreadsheet. I wasn't looking at a husband anymore. I was looking at a liability. The charge showed up on a Tuesday morning while I was waiting for my coffee to cool. Private lounge. Rooftop bar. Los Angeles. It wasn't the first time I'd seen that place on my statement, but this one was larger. Long enough that it pulled my attention away from the screen I was supposed to be reading. That night, Ethan came home later than usual. He smelled like citrus and something sharper underneath. Long day, I asked from the couch. He loosened his collar. Gallery meetings ran late. You know how it is. I nodded and let it sit there. The next weekend, Sloane posted photos from the same place. Same lighting, same view. She stood at the edge of a glass table, one hip cocked, drink lifted just enough to catch the skyline behind her. I stared at the image longer than I needed to. In the reflection on the table, just near the bottom corner, sat a watch. Ethan's watch. Not hidden, not accidental, placed like a signature. When he came into the room, I turned the phone toward him. That place looks familiar. He barely glanced. Yeah. That bar's popular. You were there recently. He shrugged. Everyone goes there. Together, the word came out calm. Ethan paused, then smiled in a way that felt rehearsed. You're reading too much into it. We ran into each other. Had a drink. That's all. Sloane laughed from the kitchen. Relax. If we were doing anything wrong, you'd know. I didn't answer. Later that night, I lay awake listening to Ethan breathe beside me. Steady, comfortable, like someone who believed the room belonged to him. Downstairs, the house settled around itself. We see this part often, the moment where someone could still turn back, where a lie might be fixed if it were spoken differently. I didn't confront him again. I didn't ask for proof. I didn't scroll further back than I already had. The certainty was quieter than anger. Heavy. Clean. The next morning, I opened my calendar and blocked out an hour. I labeled it Simply Call. When Ethan asked what I was doing that afternoon, I didn't lie. Handling something. I told him. He smiled. Satisfied. Good. Don't overwork yourself. I watched him leave, watched the door close, then picked up my phone and made the call I had been avoiding until I was sure. Not because I needed answers, because I was ready to start collecting them. Renee Park answered on the second ring. I have an hour, she said, her voice as sharp as a forensic scalpel. Start with the numbers. We can get to the heartbreak later. We met 48 hours later in a cafe that didn't exist on most maps, a windowless, quiet space near the law school. Renee didn't order coffee. She arrived with a slim, encrypted laptop and a look that suggested she had already won the case in her head. I laid out the timeline. The property upkeep invoices. The Los Angeles rooftop bar. The watch in Sloane's reflection. I didn't use adjectives. In Renee's world, adjectives were noise. Only nouns and numbers mattered. She listened, her fingers resting flat on the mahogany table. When I finished, she asked a single question. Do you want a divorce, Noelle? Or do you want an accounting? I want him to feel the exact weight of what he's taken. I replied. Renee opened her laptop, the screen glowing with a complex spreadsheet. Then you cannot confront him. Not yet. In fact, you need to be the perfect distracted wife. I blinked. You want me to let him keep doing this? I want you to let him drown himself, she corrected. What you're describing is dissipation of marital assets. It's a legal doctrine where one spouse intentionally wastes or misuses marital funds for purposes unrelated to the marriage, like funding an affair with your sister or buying designer bags for an influencer in Soho. She leaned in, her eyes cold. He's an authorized user on your accounts. which he thinks is a shield. It's actually a tether. Every time he swipes that card for Sloane's brunch or a hotel room, he is creating a digital footprint of fraud because he is misclassifying these as household expenses. He's not just cheating, he's committing financial misconduct. What's the move, I asked. We don't freeze the cards. We don't change the passwords. You let the Sunday system run, Renee said. But from this moment on, you are not a wife. You are a forensic auditor. Every invoice he mislabels, every transfer he hides, forward them to my secure server. We aren't just looking for a split. Noelle, we're looking for a total reimbursement that will leave him with a net worth of 0. I returned home to the smell of Mediterranean takeout. Ethan was leaning over the counter, laughing at a text on his phone. You're home early, he said, flashing that rehearsed smile. I handled the catering bills for next week. Don't even worry about it. Thanks. Ethan, I said, my voice steady, my heart already miles away in Carmel. I don't know what I'd do without you. I walked upstairs, closed my door, and opened the server Renee had set up. I watched the live feed of my bank activity. A new charge appeared, a luxury florist in Palo Alto. Category home improvement. I didn't feel the sting anymore. I just checked the box and hit save. I left on a Thursday. No announcement. No suitcase parade through the hallway. I packed one bag and set it by the door while the house was still quiet. Elaine was asleep. David had already left for his morning walk. Sloane's room was empty, bed untouched. Ethan stood in the doorway, tying his shoes. Heading out early, he asked, for a few days. He nodded, distracted. Text me when you land. I didn't promise anything. The drive down the coast took longer than I remembered. Traffic slowed near the cliffs. I rolled the window down anyway. Salt in the air, wind loud enough to drown out my thoughts. The gate opened with a code I'd memorized years ago. The house waited the same way it always had. Low, quiet, set back from the road like it didn't need to announce itself. The name was carved into a small wooden sign near the entry. Veritas. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. No echoes, no reminders, just space. I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes, and walked straight through to the back. The glass doors slid open with a soft click. The ocean was calm, light moving across it like something breathing. I sat on the edge of the deck, feet tucked under me, phone in my hand. One photo. The horizon. Nothing else. I typed a caption, erased it, typed again. Some milestones clarify more than they celebrate. I hit post and set the phone face down. It vibrated within minutes, then again, and again. I didn't pick it up. Inside, the house stayed still. I poured a glass of water, drank it slowly, watched the sun dip lower. We don't always leave with noise. Sometimes leaving looks like this. Quiet, clean, deliberate. Later, I checked my messages, missed calls, long texts, short ones that tried to sound casual. I turned the phone off. That night, I slept with the windows open. The sound of the ocean filled the room. No footsteps in the hall, no voices drifting up from downstairs. In the morning, I woke up already home. I went back once, not to argue, not to explain, just to close the door properly. The house looked smaller without me in it, furniture pushed out of place, a glass shattered near the sink. Someone had cried there. I could tell by the way the counter had been wiped too hard. Sloane sat at the table, arms folded, eyes sharp but unfocused. You planned this, she said. I set my keys down. I prepared. That's the same thing. Ethan stood near the hallway, pale, trying to look calm and failing. Papers were spread across the coffee table, copies, highlights, notes in Renee's handwriting. You could have talked to me, he said. We're married. I didn't raise my voice. We were married. Elaine hovered near the doorway, hands twisting together. This didn't have to become public. I didn't make it public. I said, your choices did. David finally spoke, voice flat. "You embarrassed us." I looked at him for a long second. "You left my graduation." No one answered that. Renee handled the rest. The prenuptial agreement held. The evidence was clean. Dissipation of marital assets is not a dramatic term, but it does its job. Ethan walked away with nothing tied to me. No accounts, no claims, no leverage. He didn't fight it. He couldn't. I didn't stay long after that. There was nothing left to pack. Months passed quietly. Ethan moved apartments, then jobs. Sloan disappeared from social feeds. Elaine sent messages that sounded like apologies until you read them twice. David stayed silent. At Veritas, time moved differently. I hosted small dinners. Renee came once, then again, bringing a friend. We talked about work, about nothing, about plans that didn't involve surviving anyone else. Some evenings I sat on the deck and let the day end without marking it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. One night, as the light faded, I thought about the version of myself who signed that prenuptial agreement at a tiny kitchen table, the one who didn't have proof yet, only instinct. She had been right. Not about them. About me. Noelle Carter doesn't confuse access with love anymore. She doesn't mistake presence for care. She knows what it costs to keep people comfortable at the expense of herself. And she knows how to stop paying. If you've been listening quietly, you already know why this story stayed with us. Some endings don't need noise. They just need space to settle.